Today we're going to look at two supernatural miracles. Superman's above, and we're going to look at the fact that Jesus had power over the natural world, over the properties of food and the properties of water. These two miracles take place around Lake Galilee. It's an oval shape, about 21 kilometres by 13. There are hills all around, and they funnel the wind down so that it comes down and creates violent storms at times. There are villages nestled around the shores of the sea, and the main one is Capernaum. It's on the trade route. After Jesus was rejected in his hometown of Nazareth, he made Capernaum his centre. But it was a bit like Princess Di with the media. Every time he put his nose out the door, he was mobbed. And so one day he and the disciples got in a boat and crossed over to the northeast shore of the sea, where it was much less populated, and wanted some R&R time. However, the word had got out, and the people took longer to get around the shore, but they came along to where Jesus was. He had pity on them, and he spent the day teaching and healing. Then they realised as the day went on that the people had come completely unprepared with no food, apart from one small boy. Let's have a look at the scriptures, chapter 6, starting at verse 8. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Jesus said, make the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. I can just see the fishermen going back to the boat, getting the fishing baskets and collecting the 12 baskets full of leftovers. I don't know what they did with them. Did they keep them for their own provision? Did they sell them? Did they give them to the poor? Nothing was wasted. This miracle was a sign for the crowd, a sign to show them that Jesus loved them and that he had the power to provide for their needs. As we'll see next session, not only their physical needs but also their spiritual needs. The next miracle concerns the disciples. Jesus had sent them home in the boat while he went up the mountains to pray. From his lofty perch, he could see the men struggling with the oars against a headwind and getting nowhere. It reminds me of the time Phil and I were going home on the boat through Hydrographer's Passage. We managed to get there at the right time so that we had the tide with us, but as we entered the passage there was a very strong gale force headwind against us. We motored flat out for 12 hours to go 14 nautical miles. It was frustrating, but without the engine it would have been disastrous. These men were rowing flat out and getting nowhere. They were also in a very dangerous position. So let's see what Jesus did. Looking at verse 17. By now it was dark and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing and the water grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. This miracle was for the disciples, to show them 2 things. That Jesus would protect them even if he wasn't physically there, and also that it was his strength they needed, not theirs. It says then that the boat immediately came to the next shore. I don't know whether the wind changed and they got a wind behind them, or if Jesus just miraculously took the boat there. But they needed to know for the future that he would always be with them. Now let's see the reaction of the crowd to these miracles. Verse 14 of chapter 6. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again into the hills by himself. The crowd wanted to shortcut Jesus' ministry, make their agenda his. They wanted to make him the king and to crown him, but Jesus had come for the cross. It's the same temptation that Satan had against him in the wilderness, to bypass the cross and go for the crown, but Jesus would not do this. Next session, we will see how the bread of life was rejected. I want you to read the rest of chapter 6 from verse 25 and think, why did the crowd demand a miraculous feeding when they'd just had one? What was it about Jesus' teaching that was so offensive to them? And why, when the crowd left, did the 12 disciples decide to stay? Bye.